It began with the storm inside, not outside, the kind that no weather app could warn you about. Rain lashed against the apartment windows as Auden sat cross-legged on the floor, the glow of a salt lamp flickering beside them. A journal lay open, half filled with affirmations written more out of duty than belief. Nearby a candle remained unlit, its wick untouched. A tiny symbol of effort, paused, not forgotten. The clock ticked louder than usual, syncing with the thunder rumbling through the night sky. They had done everything. Everything they were told would bring peace. Morning meditations, late-night scripting, 2 cups of herbal tea, 1 gratitude list per day, gym, goals, green juice. Even a podcast played earlier that evening, a famous voice reminding them to trust the process. But as the audio cut to silence, something else surfaced, something old. Inside, a familiar voice returned. Not the calm whisper of a guide, but the demanding shout of the striver, an identity worn like armor. Keep going, push harder, you're almost there. Auden had followed that voice for years. It got them through school, through heartbreak, through disappointment. But tonight it echoed differently, hollow, as if even it had grown tired of itself. They picked up the journal. The pen trembled slightly in their hand, not from cold, but fatigue, the soul-deep kind. Why isn't it working? They whispered to no one in particular. The room, the storm, the city outside. None replied. Their phone buzzed. Another email marked urgent. They didn't check it. Instead, they reached for the candle. Thumb hovered over the lighter, paused, and then put both down. There was no more to write, no more to plan, no new insight to extract from the wreckage of over-efforting. Just them, alone with the sound of rain and a weariness that no amount of productivity could wash away. In that moment, Auden's eyes moved to the mirror on the opposite wall. It reflected a person who looked whole, even as they unraveled. And that contrast made them pause. They had built a life around the idea that doing equaled deserving. That if they just worked hard enough, proved themselves enough, then love would land, success would come, peace would follow. But none of it did. Not in the way they expected. The truth crept in quietly, like the draft under the door. They were exhausted from trying to earn what they never had to chase. The control they clung to had become a burden, not a tool. Auden leaned back against the couch. A single breath left their chest slower than usual, less of a sigh, more of a surrender. Something unspoken gave way. Not broken, just softened. No dramatic epiphany, no tears, just a deep, internal exhale. And in that rupture, something unfamiliar slipped in. Quiet. The world doesn't test you. It reflects you. Morning light spilled through the gray sky as Auden stepped into the quiet cafe down the block. Rain beaded on the windows, muffling the city into a soft hush. Only 3 tables were occupied. A barista with kind eyes offered a warm nod. They ordered the usual, though even the ritual of coffee felt hollow now. In a corner seat by the window, Auden settled in. No phone, no planner. Just a blank page staring back at them from the open journal. They had brought it out of habit, but words didn't come. Not today. Instead, their eyes drifted to the mirror mounted above the counter. It was cracked slightly in one corner, just enough to distort the image. Through that fracture, they saw themselves, but only partially. The shoulder, a cheek, one tired eye, a reflection of someone splintered. Their coffee arrived, but they didn't sip it right away. Memories began to surface, soft and sharp. The way they'd once thrown themselves into a relationship, believing love would complete them. The way they over-prepared for every job interview, hoping professionalism could mask their self-doubt. The way they smiled too widely at people they feared would leave. Was any of it about love? Achievement? Or was it just fear, finely dressed? The voice from the day before, the one that had emerged in the stormy silence, returned, but gentler now. Less of a demand, more of an inquiry. "You don't want love," it said quietly. "You want to never be left again." The truth made Auden flinch, but not run. They picked up the pen, fingers steadier than expected. In slow, uneven lines they began to write, not affirmations but questions. Why do I need this so badly? What part of me still thinks I'm not enough? The answers didn't rush in, but the tension began to drain, like rain tapering on glass. Somewhere behind the questions was something more truthful than any to-do list. Longing, not for something new, but for something real. They stared again at the mirror. It didn't change. Still cracked, still partial, but now it seemed honest. No illusion of wholeness, just the quiet reality of someone mid-process. Auden turned to a clean page, wrote just one word. Enough? They didn't answer it. That wasn't the point. Stillness, the voice said again, is not emptiness. It's a container for clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It waits. Auden exhaled, picked up their cup, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The coffee was lukewarm now, but somehow it tasted right. The pen stopped. For the first time in years, Auden did too. They sat down to quit, but ended up staying to breathe. The forest trail was quiet, dressed in the rich amber of late autumn. Dry leaves rustled beneath Auden's boots, the sound crisp and rhythmic like a slow drumbeat. Above, the sky was pale and stretched, clouds drifting like thoughts too old to chase. For once, there was no playlist, no podcast, just the wind. They had resisted coming here. It felt indulgent, pointless even. A walk with no metric, no milestone to measure. But something in them, the quieter voice, had whispered, "Go anyway." The further they moved from the city's noise, the more the mind began to settle, not empty, never truly empty, but less cluttered, less frantic. At the halfway point, the trail curved into a clearing. A moss-covered bench sat at its center, half swallowed by brambles and thyme. Auden hesitated, then sat. They had come here with the intention to think, maybe even to solve something. Instead, they found themselves doing nothing. No deep insight, no big revelation. Just sitting, listening. Birdsong filtered through the trees, hesitant, delicate. Wind moved through pine needles like a soft breath through the soul. And slowly, Auden became aware of their own breath again. Not in the forced way of meditation apps, but in its own natural rhythm. Inhale, hold, release. The first few minutes were uncomfortable. The mind, like a child in withdrawal, itched for distraction. A notification, a headline, a goal. But beneath the itch, something new emerged. A memory of their younger self surfaced, sitting at the edge of a lake, legs dangling, no plans, no striving, just being. That younger version wasn't more innocent, just more attuned, unencumbered by timelines and expectations. And now, here in the forest's hush, Auden realized they hadn't felt peace in years. Not because it was absent, but because they had been outrunning it. The wind shifted. An elderly hiker, face weathered like old bark, passed them slowly. He said nothing, just nodded, eyes kind. It felt like an acknowledgement from the woods themselves. "You're allowed to rest." Auden let their spines soften. No longer upright with purpose, but aligned with ease. They noticed things, the way the light flickered through the trees, how one golden leaf spiraled in midair before landing softly at their feet. This wasn't surrender in the way they had feared. It wasn't failure. It was returning. The voice returned, not a command, but a knowing. "You've survived chaos. Now learn how to survive calm." They stayed there longer than planned. Time stretched but didn't feel wasted. Nothing was fixed. Nothing needed to be. "I've never been this still and survived it," Auden thought. And then they smiled, just a little. But the void wasn't empty. It was listening. No signs, no answers, just space. Snow gathered quietly on the window ledge of the solitary retreat cabin. Beyond the fogged glass, a frozen lake lay motionless, wrapped in silence. Inside, Auden sat wrapped in a blanket, the room scented with pine and smoke from the morning fire. Their journal lay open, untouched. Nearby, a single page had been torn out, the one where they had once written, "If nothing changes, what's the point?" It was day 3, maybe 4. They had stopped counting. The silence here was different from the forest's hum or the cafe's murmur. It wasn't passive. It pressed in. It demanded presence, the kind that didn't flinch or chase. The kind that offered no entertainment, no distraction, no feedback. And it was starting to get to them. Auden had expected something by now. A vision, a breakthrough, even a breakdown. But each morning was just snow and chores, firewood, boiling water, the endless hiss of tea. Even their dreams gave little comfort. Strange fragments of a child staring at locked doors, keys melting in their hand. Stillness now felt like weight, a test without instructions. By the 5th night, doubt crept in like cold through the floorboards. What am I doing here? They thought. What if nothing's happening at all? They almost packed, almost lit their phone. But the fire flickered low, and instead they wrapped themselves tighter in the blanket and sat. Nothing forced, just sat. Their breath was shallow at first, but then it slowed, matched the flame. They noticed the sound of the wind again, not as threat, but rhythm. And slowly something shifted, not in the room, but in them. A presence rose, not external, but remembered. The same voice from the cafe and forest. Wiser now. Less whisper, more ground. "This is not punishment," it said. "It's purification." Auden's eyes closed. In that darkness, an image formed. Their childhood room, dimly lit. They stood at the threshold, younger, watching a parent shout behind a closed door. No one opened it. No one explained. Only silence. Back then, silence felt like danger. Now, it felt like invitation. Auden walked through that mental doorway. Grief came, not loud, but deep. A weeping that didn't need reason, just space, and they gave it space, not to fix, but to witness. The fire popped, and just like that, something uncoiled, not healed, but seen. The journal remained closed that day, not from resistance, but because there was nothing to write. Not yet. This wasn't a chapter for articulation. It was for alchemy. Later, Auden stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in layers. Breath visible, heart quieter. Snowflakes landed on their sleeve and stayed a moment before disappearing. Small, silent visitors that asked nothing, promised nothing, and still managed to touch. They watched the lake. No ripples, no reflections, just presence. In the deepest part of that stillness, where most would turn back, something finally began to form. Not a message, not a sign, but a knowing. Even this belongs. And in that breath, the void cracked open into light. You don't attract what you chase. You attract what you've accepted. The scent of cinnamon and rosemary drifted from the kitchen as Auden stepped into the familiar warmth of their childhood home. It had been years since they'd returned during the holidays, not out of distance but out of habit. They had always kept moving, too many memories, too many silences. But this year felt different, not because the house had changed. It hadn't. The same photos hung on the hallway walls, the same couch, the same small lamp still flickering in the corner. But Auden wasn't the same. They noticed it first in the way they walked, slower, not dragging, not rushing, just present. Their parent hummed softly while peeling sweet potatoes, not expecting help, but also not refusing it when Auden quietly stepped in. No questions, no tension, just shared breath and rhythm. Later, while rummaging in the attic for old holiday ornaments, Auden opened a dusty box labeled Drawings and Odds. Inside, they found a small, crumpled page, a child's drawing, bare lines and bright colors. It took a second, but they remembered. It was theirs. The house, the sun, and in the corner, a tiny figure holding a balloon with the word enough scribbled above it in crayon. They held the drawing for a long time. That night, they sat with their sibling in the dim living room, a quiet jazz record playing low. Between sips of tea, a conversation unfolded. Not about news or weather, but the kind that hadn't happened in years. Raw. Kind. "I've been tired," Auden said finally, voice barely louder than the record. But not from work, from pretending to be okay. There was no awkwardness. Just a pause. "Me too," the sibling said. "For different reasons, but yeah." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just sat. And for the first time, Auden didn't feel like the strong one or the broken one, just someone being real. And that was enough. Back in their old room, the wallpaper still faintly peeled at the edges. Auden found an old notebook tucked behind a drawer. Dreams and Questions, the cover read in childlike handwriting. Flipping through it, they found entries filled with wonder, not goals. Questions like, where does love go when people leave? And what does the sky sound like underwater? There was something sacred about it, before chasing, before measuring, just pure presence. Auden picked up a pen, this time not from duty but clarity. On the last page they wrote one word, enough, not as a wish, as a truth. The mirror they passed that night didn't feel cracked anymore. It hadn't changed, but their gaze had. There was no search in their eyes, no reaching, just being. And for once, it didn't feel like a lie. You're not manifesting, you're remembering. Dawn crept through the city like breath through a flute, gentle, almost hesitant. Auden walked slowly, wrapped in a wool coat, hands tucked deep into warm pockets. The streets, still wet from a night drizzle, shimmered under the early light. No destination. Just movement. Just now. A park bench near the fountain called to them, same as it had months ago, back when mornings were rushed and presence was a luxury. But this time, there was no rush, no playlist, no pressure, only breath and birds. They sat, watched the city come alive. Children tugged parents forward on their way to school. A cyclist sped past, dodging puddles with practiced grace. A street vendor rolled up their cart, steam rising as hot dough met oil. Ordinary things, yet now everything shimmered with a subtle, steady beauty. Auden smiled. Their phone buzzed once. A new message. Work-related. Important, maybe. They didn't check it right away. There was nothing to avoid, just nothing to chase. The candle from the apartment, long unlit, had been lit before they left. Not out of ritual, not to manifest. Just because the morning felt ready. The flicker had matched the quiet pulse of their breath. There was no grand declaration. No new life, waiting behind some spiritual door. Just this moment, fully met. And for Auden, that was everything. They stood eventually, walked slowly again, past a man arguing on his phone, a woman pacing, a car horn slicing through the air. None of it disturbed them. Not because the world had changed, but because they had stopped fighting its rhythm. They had become it. The voice, the one from the void, the mirror, the forest, didn't speak anymore. Not because it was gone, but because it had woven itself into their very breath. It was no longer something to hear. It was something to be. At the next corner, they paused, watched a flock of birds take off into the pale sky, moving together without needing to agree. Just aligned. Auden didn't need a sign anymore. They had stopped searching, had stopped proving, had stopped trying to earn a life that was already theirs to live. They walked on, and the world walked with them. Stillness was no longer silence. It was home. The candle's flame flickered softly in the corner of a quiet room, not as a symbol, but simply as itself. Steady, unbothered by the wind outside. Morning light pooled across the floor, and somewhere in the stillness, the world felt full again. Even in silence, something moves. Stillness is not the absence of life. It's its purest form, the kind that listens deeper than words and holds without clinging. Perhaps today is another invitation to trust that quiet, to meet the moment, not with effort, but with presence.